Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Our work session is called to order. We appreciate the patience of administration, staff, and stakeholders who are standing by for the beginning of the meeting. Let me share with you our adjusted agenda due to the limited amount of time that we have left, and we need to wrap up right around 6:30 and prepare for transition to our public budget hearing. So we will consider first this afternoon 3.02 academic affairs, and following that we will transition to 3.04 operations and business and finances, and if time permits we will hear the matter on the early start waiver application, the update on the early start waivers. Okay? So we will begin with item 3.01, academic affairs. Dr. King?
Chairman, here's the members of the board. 3.02, academic affairs, will consist of an update in reference to progress monitoring, data reporting at the school level as well as the aggregate process. With that said, I will ask Ms. Campson and Dr. Bailey to come forward.
Members of the school board, Dr. King. We are well into our new assessment system, and that's what Dr. Bale and I will be sharing, the results of our mid-year assessments. We did have a little glitch. It was called the never-ending snow. So luckily, our elementary schools did their mid-year assessments in January and early February. So we do have that assessment data for you, hopefully in the different formats that you've requested, and this will be a time for us to see what other adjustments we need to make. Middle school and secondary schools did their testing, well, had planned to do their testing the second 2 weeks in February. They are testing now. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Bailey.
Thank you, Ms. Campson, and also with us today is Dr. Lisa Corbin, Senior Executive Director of Curriculum Instruction. Her content coordinators, Ms. Monica Robinson, Ms. Adrienne Britton, Mr. Bart Williams, and Mr. Bruce Brady. And as we go through this, we are reporting on the two measures that we outlined, STAR reading as well as our district-level common formative assessments. First of all, our STAR reading is provided to you using grade equivalent to monitor student progress from one time period to the next. And so what we have done is we have provided the fall, which is in the gold color, overlaid with the blue, which tells you where we are up to at this point. We have also provided for you an additional executive summary that gives you some detailed information as it relates to our STAR assessments. What we have found also as you review individual school assessments or scores, that some of our schools have used this as part of a tiered intervention program, using it primarily for their Tier 2 and 3 students at the mid-year. All students took the initial assessment, and we feel confident all students will take it at the end. But at the mid-year, some of our schools, you'll see, that decided to use it for their Tier 2 or 3. So we feel pretty good with this, but some of our schools also used other assessments such as PALS, CORES, DRA, and some other assessments.
Can you put that one back just for a moment? I know we're in a time, but just to make sure, what the gold is showing is when the children walked into the door in September, that percentage of the children were reading on grade level or doing math on the math went on grade level. So that if we were doing an average amount of growth, you expect your children to grow a year with a year's instruction, then January, the gold and the blue had been at the exact same spot because we had not done any increasing in the number of our children that were reading or doing math on grade level. The blue indicates the students who made rapid progress and grew more than a half a year during that half a year time, so that we have managed to increase the number of our children who are reading and doing math on grade level by mid-year. And so that we hope that the number will even increase more. So with a year in the classroom, we have increased the percentage of our children who are actually working on grade level. And that's what's exciting about this. Each of those blue bars show that many more children who are now working on grade level than we had when they walked in our doors in September. And I think that that's way good news for Celebration. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Bailey.
That's all right.
I'm just so excited about the improvement.
Right. Same thing with our math performance. This mirrors the performance that we have seen with our CFAs. And we also feel that it's a continuation of our SOL performance from last year, where we saw great improvement, and we feel that we'll see even more improvement this year as we sit for the assessment. We did do a joint analysis with Renaissance Learning and found a strong correlation of our STAR reading with our SOL reading scores at 0.78, 0.79. And really what this articulates to is that the STAR reading can identify our students' performance, or proficient, non-proficient, at a rate of 82%. So we feel pretty confident with that. We will continue our advanced analysis at the end of this year when we have 2 years of data. On to our monthly
Question?
okay, I'm sorry.
So the STAR reading and math, these are programs, like a computer program or a written format that the,
It's a computer adaptive assessment.
okay.
And primarily for math and reading. Ms. Robinson, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, it's a computer adaptive program. One of the things that it's primarily used for is interventions within the building, so that teachers can find out exactly where students are falling short and then make those adjustments.
And you said, to go back, you said there's an 82% correlate between what they score on this program with math and reading to how their test scores were with the SOLs.
Right.
Based on the scaled score
Yeah.
of the STAR assessment, not based on the grade equivalence.
Right. So based on the scale score, we can predict proficient, non-proficient at a rate of 82%.
Okay.
So as we look deeper into our assessments as we move throughout the year, we'll be looking very closely at that alignment.
And so that's why we want the bars to continue up, because
Right.
when we get that alignment, we're looking at it at the end of the year. Where they are at the end of the year is where the correlation is. So we don't want it to be where we were in September, or even where we are now. That's why we want to continue to have more students and more students working on grade level. And the nice thing about this is, it's not saying, grade level compared to what grade level work is in this school or this district. It's saying across the country it's standardized. So that gives us a look at how, if we tell a parent that their child's on grade level, it's a grade level standard for the country.
And also, yes, the grade level or grade equivalent
Right. Thank you.
is measured, it's a norm reference type measurement. And so it gives you the average across the nation, not just Norfolk Public Schools.
And the one thing that we really like about STAR is that it's highly rated for the use with diverse populations, which is the type of population that we have here. Not all assessments work as well with urban school districts, but this one's very, very highly rated to use with our type of students.
So would it be an accurate statement to say that for grade 2, we have roughly 65% of our students are reading on grade level? Is that an accurate statement based upon
Or
this
within
graph?
that range, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, roughly 60, 67,
Yeah.
68. Yes. Okay. Our monthly assessments are given at the elementary level, primarily reading and math. Our history and science areas are being assessed quarterly. Our performance has improved primarily in reading, grade 5, and math, grade 3 and 4, as illustration of this graph. Our focus moving forward will be on reading, grade 3, as well as supporting our focus and priority schools. Okay, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about that, if I may? So if you look back to reading grade 3, it's about 51% proficient reading. In grade 3 here, we have 31-ish or so percent. Is there a correlation between the two, or am I comparing apples to oranges?
Well, what we can say, it's not totally a true comparison, because what we know is that not all of our schools tested all of their students in the STAR, whereas for our common formative assessments, they did.
And also, what we're hoping that if they're reading on grade level, they would be more quick to get the skills, because we're looking at grade level or grade equivalent performance on the STAR. Here, we're looking at a test on particular skills that were taught in the month of January. And so it's not all, so you are in a way comparing apples to oranges, but our hope would be that if we have 65% of our children reading on grade level, that they're ready to get those skills. And so when we look at this, it gives us some areas that we would be able to now focus in on, both to improve our own instruction as well as to give extra help to our children.
Ms. Robinson, do you have any additional comments? Okay, thank you. And so, as Ms. Campson has mentioned, that our secondary assessments were delayed due to inclement weather. And so we were able to tease out, if you will, our secondary high school reading assessments for grade 9 and 11. And certainly as we move forward, our efforts will be focused on our grade 11 students who will be taking their SOL writing assessments this month. Our next steps certainly include targeted professional development in specific areas identified by our content coordinators, some classroom observations, as well as coaching, review and monitoring of guided reading practices. And basically what this is the teacher working with small groups of students with similar deficiencies, and sharing of high-impact strategies across the board. And this includes all of our priority and focus schools. And that concludes our presentation.
Okay. Questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Jordan?
So if I'm understanding the data that you're showing us tells us where we are, is there something that shows where you expected us to be? And is there something, I guess with our own common formative assessments, you can't necessarily compare to other districts, but I guess on the star reading, if I understand correctly, you can. So where are we against where we said we wanted to be or hope to be based upon what you're showing us? Does that make sense? I mean, at the beginning of the year, I know when we went through some of the work plans and things in the past, we said that at a given point in time, we thought we would be at a certain point. So I'm trying to determine, I understand, for example, math grade 3 proficient, looks like is at 58%. Is that where we thought we would be? Are we on schedule, behind schedule, ahead of schedule? Can you speak to that at all?
With respect to STAR, both reading and math, it is a new measure that we are looking at this year. Normally, we look at a beginning and end-of-year type performance. This is the first time looking at it at the mid-year point. I feel that certainly, as indicated, not all of our students participated based on various reasons. And so it is, for a lot of our schools, when you look at the individual schools, it is giving us a reflection. I would say that if, at this point, if you have 50%, 75% of your students within the range, you're on target to being successful at the end of this school year. If we defer then and look at our common formative assessments, certainly overall at the district we are showing improvement, specifically our 5th grade, who did very well on our SOL assessments last year as grade 4 students. Our grade 3 students who are now last year who are now grade 4, we have found as a cohort they are needing a little bit more support. And then more specifically, our grade 3 reading is an area that we are focusing in on and trying to improve it across the board for all of our schools.
On these particular charts, so if we look at reading grade 4, we knew that last year we had the grade 3 cohort. Are you saying that we're seeing progress compared to what the cohort was last year? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
But on these charts, it doesn't necessarily show us what that.
It doesn't necessarily show that, and certainly because I look at it a lot, all the time, you know.
Yeah, you see.
Day
it,
and
right?
night.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it would be helpful, at least I think it would be helpful to me, I think from a board perspective, to be able to see it in comparison to something so we can.
Right, and I appreciate your question, and, you know, certainly I've kind of struggled a little in the best way to present that to you that's not too technical oriented. And so, you know, we certainly will then circle back and try to come up with something.
And in addition to that, one thing I would suggest to the board to take note around, which is not presented during this abbreviated session, would be the fact that you received disaggregated student data around student subgroups as well. And that speaks to the gaps that we know are so important. And as it relates to the ethnic category, also gifted students, ELL students, special needs students, as well as economically disadvantaged. So what we want to see, based on what you heard Ms. Campson and Dr. Bailey mention, we want to compare where each of those subgroups is performing, compare it to where we expect them to be at this point. And how close are we? Are we above it? Are we below it? What are the gaps? And then what are we doing about what we see? So I want to draw your attention to that, because that is something that is important to us, but we're having this analysis to drill down to where the needs are and what the common threads are around particular elements of the standard that we need to provide safety nets to students across the district as well as in individual schools. Lastly, I would like to ask if you all would speak a bit more about secondary, because I know that this only represents a certain percentage because we're not complete with the testing, but when you look at the proficient versus needs improvement versus does not meet, you see that the does not meet category would be of concern. And so talk a little bit about next steps with that and how that might compare to what we saw last year, or say to us that it's too early to do that. But of course we can talk about what's here, a little more about what that means for us at the secondary level.
Ms. Robinson can probably address some of the extra things that she's put in place at the secondary level with her team.
With the secondary level, the data, obviously it's not all in, so we don't have the clear results of where we are. I think in terms of assessment, we're ahead of where we were last year for 11th grade. 9th grade is always challenging because those students are transitioning from middle school, and so that was why we made the decision to start assessing 9th grade so that we could get some insight into how high school was progressing before we made it to that 11th grade where they test for English. We definitely see where the teachers have a better understanding of the new concepts for the new standards. Just last week, we received some released items, which we have not had previously. And so that's giving teachers something to use in terms of reviewing, because prior to that, we were just basing our reviews based on what we thought the test would look like, or what we, gleaned that it could look like. But now we actually have some idea of what the test questions will look like. And that's given our teachers some information to use in terms of creating their own in-class formative assessments, as well as how we create our own district-wide assessments.
A really good summary. And basically, that's what all of this is about, is using this to make sure that we're not just doing like old time, well, they're doing low, let's remediate. And instead, and the reason we tend to call it intervention now is to kind of distinguish the difference in what we do. You're a low reader, so you just, we take you into a low reading group, or you didn't pass this math test, so we just reteach all of it. Instead, we very focused pull our students, and using some extended learning time to give them extra help with our safety nets before school, after school, on Saturdays during the school day. And when they're pulled for it, they're pulled for very specific skills that these tests show what they missed. And that's what the common formative assessments do. It shows us exactly which skills they had trouble on. They may have done well on some of the skills, and they don't need to be retaught those. We don't need to use up their time. This way we can, if it's main idea they're having trouble with, that's where they're going to get lessons on main idea. They may already have cause and effect. Or if it's long division, then they don't need to have another lesson on addition if they've already got that. It's to make sure that we really focus, and that's what the common formative assessments do for us. The STAR lets us know the kids we really need to focus on. And then when we disaggregate it, as Dr. King was saying, we can then even prioritize more. But that's really where that's what our safety nets are for.
The STAR program Is it your goal to have every school use that, assessment?
Yes, starting next year, we're phasing everything in as part of the new assessment
Okay.
system. We're trying to build a new system, and it'll be grades 2 through 8.
Okay.
We want to do our second grades the way Ms. Robinson was saying. She's interested in looking at the ninth graders, so we do early identification before they hit 11th grade. Well, we want to start doing second grade. So next year, you'll see second grade with CFAs, and second grade are already doing the STAR. And next year, that will go district-wide. Mostly the schools that are testing, they're tiered, are mostly the accredited schools. Rather, if you look, you'll see that most of the ones that were just doing the tier testing were the accredited, but next year, they'll all do them.
So are all of our focus and priority schools included in this?
Yes.
Okay.
In the school improvement cluster, every student was tested both times.
Okay, good.
How often is the testing occurring?
For the STAR testing, it's 3 times a year. It's what we call a universal screen, because we're going to screen everyone, and so you want to know where they were at the beginning, where they ended up, so you can see growth. But the reason we like the January one is so we can have a checkpoint to see if we need to make some adjustments to what we're doing, or we need to focus on some other children. So the January one, and that's what Dr. Bailey was saying, new, because we really want to have a checkpoint in the middle. But with the CFAs, those are going to be done monthly at the elementary level.
How often, so the CFAs are done monthly, and then we have 3 STAR tests, and then we have the SOL test.
Yes.
What other testing methods do we do?
At which level?
Say at the elementary level.
At the elementary level, they are using other instructional applications such as iStation. They use the DRA, which is direct reading assessment. They also do PALS, which is a more comprehensive assessment at the primary grade levels, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade.
And who is administering the test?
For the most part, teachers are. For our CFAs, we have our school test coordinators that help coordinate that event. But for the other assessments, our teachers are.
Right, and the DRA and the PALS are mostly used in the lower grades where they're not doing these assessments. And they are longer to administer because 5- and 6-year-olds cannot sit down in a big group and just work on a test. They have to really be done in small groups, very teacher directed.
Oh, these are my questions. Okay.
And to reiterate, I would remind the board to, as we roll this out and disaggregate, to pay close attention to the economically disadvantaged subgroups at all of those levels compared to where the non-economically disadvantaged subgroups are performing. Because as we see those gaps begin to close and move in the same direction, which should be upward, you'll notice that it's almost in the did not meet category, the economic disadvantaged student population as far as the percentage that did not meet compared to the non-economically disadvantaged subgroup, that is doubled in most cases. And so thus the reason those safety nets are so important. And you remember those line graphs at the end of the school year where we saw that we were seeing inclines. However, if we accelerate the gap between the students that are economically disadvantaged and those that are not, and they all move at the same, if we accelerate that movement for economically disadvantaged students and also continue to raise the ceiling, that then we'll begin to see the type of traction that we need. So as you see these reports, you should watch how those gaps begin to close.
In the gap assessments, will there be an overlay from January to February to March, so you can see the progress there? In other words, when I come back to look again, will I be able to compare what's happened in This was done for January.
Yes.
The February one is starting later this week. We're behind schedule because we needed to allow the schools to recapture some instructional time, and so we don't actually start testing, which we would have normally tested the February assessments the end of February, but because we missed 7 days, we have extended that testing window because teachers quite rightly, are very interested in having as much instructional time as they can with their students. So it's going to be a little bit behind as we move forward.
I gotta ask a question. At what point in time are we over testing? I mean, we're using up so much time for testing for monthly CFAs, for the STAR testing, for the SOLs. I know they're not every grade, but at what point do we get to see diminishing returns?
The testing is not quite as much as that you hear. These monthly CFAs are limited to 10 questions, so that the math can be taken for the first half hour of the math block. 10 questions, about 30 minutes. Some children need a little bit longer, but you can let them continue on and the teacher can start doing some instruction. The reading test takes longer. We usually give them an hour for the reading test, but it's 1 or 2 passages, and it's been a little longer in the past. We've actually just recently shortened it for one of these, for this very reason, down to 10 to 12 questions. So they're done once a month. Now, the students who have interventions with the interventionists do take a reassessment at the end, so we can see that the interventions are successful and that they now have it. But not as much time as you would think. That's not a lot of time out of a whole month of instruction. The STAR's given 3 times a year, but the STAR test it's on a computer, and the computer moves them along. It doesn't let them just sit there. So a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes at the most for the kids that just keep going. It's a SMART test, so that the better you do, the higher it goes and the more items you do. If you head out, it starts to come down as it levels off to give you a more accurate score. So some children can finish pretty quickly, some children take a little bit longer, but it doesn't take that long to do. We only do that 3 times a year. So that's not really as much as it seems like. Some schools have some extra things they do, and that's certainly something that we're looking at now as we look at what kind of assessments, because it's a concern we all have. But on the other hand, we don't want to be doing our instructional planning and delivery blind. And we're just doing a blanket generic instruction for our children without looking at what every child needs. And all of our children are different. And we need to make sure that we are adjusting and differentiating our instruction to meet their needs. So you're going to have something to find out what their needs are. But I'm a parent too, and I don't want my kids taking tests all day, but I would never want them in a place that wasn't looking at what they needed.
That's why I asked the question. And
And
thank
that's
you for
a really good
thanks for the
question. Yeah.
clarification. My other concern is the stress inducement from the testing environment, and if it's shortened and I think it's a little mitigated
Well,
by
plus, I
that.
think it's how you do it, and a lot of schools do a lot with rewards. They have like reading parties for the kids that do well, little popcorn things to motivate the children. It's how you do it, and you can stress children out. Children can stress themselves out. Their parents can stress them out. But as a teacher, I don't want my students to be stressed when they're testing. I know when we're doing SOL tests, we're at the front door, we have raps playing on the TV, and we're all, dancing around and singing SOL songs, and we're telling, and the little first and second graders are going, oh, can I do that? Because we have, SOL picnics, and that's what schools do, so that the little kids are actually wishing that they were taking it. Because they would then get to go to the SOL picnic, and they would get the SOL pencil, although that kind of doesn't work so well anymore now that we're all online. But we used to have our magic pencils that always had magic in them, so they can use those if they're doing little justifications on their scratch paper. But it's a motivation thing, and I think you'll find most of the schools you walk in during the testing time, they're up. Everybody's there, and our idea is to get the kids excited about it, because if you're 8 years old, especially the SOL test is so long. Our little short 10-minute ones, 10-question ones aren't so much, but you want to motivate them, because if you're 8 and you're getting bored with it, you're going to be drawing pictures with. So.
Could
You're
you sing a
welcome.
little bit of the SOL song?
I have to
which
tell you,
camera?
last year at our school, we actually took the happy song, and we did the happy song, and we had the kids we had every single classroom, and the kids were holding their happy things, and we pre-did it ahead of time, so that on our monitor in the hallways, the kids came in, that happy song was playing with all the happy signs. So everyone really, it's not going to eliminate the stress, I'm not going to tell you that, but the idea is to try and make it as positive as we can, because the SOL test, that's not a choice. We have to do that.
They do that at UVA?
Dr. Stewart?
They will.
Dr. Bailey and Ms. Campson, what I want you to say when I'm finished with my soliloquy is to say, Dr. Stewart, you're right. Okay? That's what I hope you'll say. But, and you need to understand the first part is propaganda. I am no fan of high-stakes testing. High-stakes testing. If it was as great as folks have tried to make it out to be, all of our private schools, Norfolk Academy, Norfolk Christian, all would have adopted them. But having said that, this is CFAs, Combative Formative Assessment. What makes this a little different is this is common. But every good teacher assesses all along the way to find out how you doing. What makes this different, this is not high-stakes testing. This is common. That means everyone is encouraged to do something of a similar nature so that all of us can march together towards the same goal. So the common formative assessment part of this is what all good teachers have to do every day anyway, and that is to say, how you doing? How you got it? Are we doing well? So, again, I'm not a high-stakes testing advocate, but in this particular case, common is the key word. This is something of commonality among all grade levels, key subjects, and whatever. So remember, the right answer you don't need to say, but that's my opinion. So as I hear combative formative assessment, thank you. What I don't hear is the tension that high-stakes testing has added to us and the danger. And again, I think private schools would be well to take our combative formative assessments on, but I'm sure they're not going to buy the high-stakes testing. Thanks for listening.
And you're right, Dr. Stewart.
Dr. King? I'm sorry, did you have another comment?
No, sir. That was kind of you to listen.
Okay.
Along the same line, of course, we know that the high-stakes test is what is being utilized to get us to 100% accreditation. Okay, so without a doubt, that's extremely important. That is the indicator, one of the major indicator. So one of the items of importance for us is that we ensure that we are preparing students with the appropriate test-taking skills and all the things that come into play that they're going to encounter during that summative high-stakes test. And so by doing some of the things that you're hearing now, it begins to expose our children to be able to compete with anyone else, their age appropriate. Lastly, testing endurance as well as reading endurance, and all of those things come into play because when they are sitting for that test online, if they've never done it before and they've not had the length of passages that they're going to receive during the summative, then they're ill prepared. So some of that is a responsibility that we have as an administration to ensure that they are being exposed and prepared in the way that they really need to be. And then balance that with not providing too much assessment, but enough so that they are able to be successful. So that's important.
That's a good point. Okay. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
One other.
Since last year, would you say that the gap between black and white students has been closing? I mean, you're looking at the data, are those gaps closing, or are they remaining the same, or getting larger?
I think as evidence of our SOLs, we are seeing some reduction in our gaps. When we break it out by individual grade level that is assessed, we're not seeing that closure as much among all grade levels. But overall, we are seeing a reduction in our gaps, but probably not at the rate that we would like to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we will move to item 3.04, Operations, Business, and Finance. Dr. King?
Chairman Houston, members of the board, 3.04 Operations, Business and Finance will consist of 5-year CIP, fiscal year 2016 budget planning, title grant funding update, 2015-16 district calendar review. Dr. Thornton and Mr. Gay.
Thank you, Dr. King, Chairman Houston, school board members, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As Dr. King indicated, we have several items to share with you, many of which to bring you up to date. The first would be, again, a review, but more importantly, an opportunity for the board to ask any follow-up questions on the previously presented 5-year capital improvement plan that was presented to the board in January. It is still in proposal or recommended status, so this is again an opportunity for the board, after having it for a few weeks now, to ask any questions. Mr. Gay, of course, is here to answer any specific questions, but you'll find on page 24 of the document a summary of the plan itself by major project type, project description, and the 5-year looking out, beginning with fiscal year 16 through fiscal year 2020. The total capital improvement plan, including the original preliminary estimate for the PPEA projects, the 5 new schools, 4 of which are under the design phase now, and Camp Allen is at this present time on hold. So the total 5-year proposed capital improvement plan is just over $177 million. As I shared with you and Mr. Gay echoed when we presented this in January, this is just a, this is not intended to be representative of all of the capital needs of the division, but it is intended to outline for you some of the major needs that we anticipate over the next 5 years. It relates to just maintaining our existing infrastructure without adding any significant increase to capacity. Obviously, with declining enrollment, we're not necessarily looking at major capacity needs at this point in time. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have regarding the CIP.
Yes.
So I have a few questions in no particular order. Does the data at the front reflect the current Deshaun Richter data that was updated a few weeks ago that is still under consideration in terms of the division?
I believe that the data here is from the original report that was shared with the board.
Yeah,
So
this
does-
is from the original study.
So do we need to update that in order for us to have a better picture of our building needs, our capital needs?
No. Now, I think going forward, any information that we can garner from their report as we move forward, we can use.
Right.
But we're talking about a report that was developed 2 to 3 months ago.
Right.
And so, just as Dr. Thornton might have mentioned earlier, when he talked about the estimate for the PPEA proposal, that's included in that report as well. But we know the date that they're only proposing to build 4 schools, and we have 1 school on hold. So instead of us having $128 million that we've indicated in this report, we're gonna have $101 million.
Right.
So that information that they're gonna use and that we're still working on, and we're scheduled to meet with them sometimes, I guess, in the next couple of weeks, we can use it going forward, but it doesn't need to change the report.
Okay, good. That leads to my next question, because obviously there will be recommendations that we'll likely act on that would impact whether or not a building is used for its current purpose, whether it's used at all.
Right.
What would be the savings as a result? Would we put a roof on it if we didn't need it in a year? Would we remove the asbestos if we didn't need to, or would we replace tile? So there are some pages in here I noted where we're replacing some things for buildings that we're either going to be building anew, like bowling, or is Willoughby gonna be what it is today moving forward? So that's 2 different things. One's new construction, one is repurposing potentially. So I would ask us truly to consider this more of a draft, because I do think there are some other factors that are gonna come into play that will determine whether or not we do any of these projects.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think we need to consider it as a draft. I think you need to consider the report as it is. I think it needs to be adopted as it is, and what everybody needs to be mindful of, and this school board, of course, hadn't had this opportunity. But once this report is completed, anything in this report is subject to change, and it's subject to change based on the direction that the school system takes at any given time. So you might remember from the last time as we presented, we talked about Tidewater Park's roof.
Right.
And that has been on a hold for a while. All right, so we're talking about $500,000 that we didn't want to spend because we didn't know the fate of Tidewater Park. And so now we have redesigned that replacement for one that will not cost as much. However, we're at a point now that we're gonna have to replace that roof, and we're probably gonna have to do it this summer.
And I see that, and then there's another example where, for instance, Richard Bowling removing some ceiling relative to the multipurpose room, et cetera, and is that really necessary if we're gonna be opening that
And-
school?
And that's right. That one will not happen. But also keep in mind that the observations that my staff and I make throughout these daily observations, going from school to school, we've got to include some of these in the report because we know they need to be done. And so when our report was developed, of course, we knew we were embarking on a PPA process, but we didn't know if we would get there or not. And so now we broke ground on one school and we had a groundbreaking yesterday on another school. And so we know we won't be doing that at Bowling Park. So that's a project that'll get scratched off.
Right.
And then when we take that one off of the list, of course, it makes room for another one to move in its place.
And then one last question is, I noticed that on page 39, you talk about the pre-kindergarten program, and the expansion of pre-kindergarten allows for the addition of 10 classrooms, but the estimated construction cost is $120,000. Is that something that's in CIP, operating fund? How is that paid for, and have we accounted for that in our budget for this next year?
And you know what? It's not in either budget. And it's one of those things that when it has to happen, of course, that hits our operation budget. And, moving forward to the end of the year is how it depletes our budget.
Because these will obviously need to be done. And
Right.
construction will have to happen in order for us to accommodate these additional pre-Ks.
Right.
What I've observed in the past is that what Rex will do is that, say he'll do that Tidewater Park roof replacement at a lower cost because we're switching the type of roof we're putting on it. Take that money and have that ready for, as an example, ready for upgrading the pre-K classrooms. Rex is a magician with moving money around to fill the needs of the school district when it comes to CIP projects. And it's not, I shouldn't say a magician, he's very skillful at allocating resources to the appropriate projects. How's that sound? Is that better?
I just noted because it's a significant sum. If we do 10, it's over $1 million. And if we don't have that budgeted, and we're going to have to find that, we're going to have to dig deep to do that. And I know it's a sunk cost, it's a one-time, I get it, but today we don't have the money to do it technically. So, thank you.
And again, the idea is that the needs have been identified, they've been scheduled out, and the expectation, process-wise, that the board would approve with any revisions the plan. And then, as Mr. Gay said, year one would be the primary focus. It's all contingent upon the availability of funding, where we would probably have to reprioritize or prioritize based on funding. Traditionally, we've gotten $3 million. We've identified just under $18 million worth of facility-related maintenance project needs. Of course, bowling is there for 2 items, but the majority of these year one items are for facilities that are continuing to age, and there's no plan to replace or do any major renovation. But your observation on bowling is a good observation, and as Rex said, we'll have to adjust accordingly. And each year, if the board chooses to adopt the plan with any revisions potentially, we'll come back next year and report on the progress made on year one, any changes that may have taken place, and then we'll build a new 5-year plan. And some of these projects will probably stay in the plan. They may move around for whatever various reasons, but we'll add another year. It'll be 17 through 21 as a 5-year plan. And it's relatively fluid because it's oftentimes contingent upon funding.
Yes, Dr. Stewart.
Start off with some thank yous. Mr. Gay, you've got some very happy folks in some schools about the wonderful work you're doing now. I won't mention that one of them's Blair and all these other places, but the great work operating under current CIP plans. Dr. Thornton, knowing that you could do a good job of 5-year CIP planning gave me great solace when you came. Your process planning your list of things for us to expect in the next few weeks on where this was grateful. Now I've got to tell you the buts, and remember, watch out for the buts. You very clearly stated this is not comprehensive. What I don't want to happen, Dr. King and Dr. Thornton and Mr. Gay, is I don't want the annual operating budget to be taxed to the point that students' learning is affected by items that we must do that could have been CIP. What I say that we could do is supplemental appropriations, and that's possible. But there's some things missing that I want to at least go on record now in mentioning. One, terrazzo floors absent in the new construction will be a CIP issue that will come in your out-year budgets. Mr. Gay, you know that. They will. With the future of Tidewater Park, as you just mentioned. It was mentioned in a letter from across the street. We don't know what's in the minds. We need to know that so that you can do a better job of five-year planning. None of these things, Dr. Thornton, Dr. King, or anything you could do anything about. We requested to know what Madison, what alternative programs would be like with the new open campus school and everything else. And Dr. King, with all that's gone on, I'm not sure what you could have done to tell us what those options that needed to be added are. But again, I don't want anything to be taken from the annual operating budget that could be included. So futures related to alternative education in the Madison program, the what and where of it all, futures related to Tidewater Park, futures related to CTE and all of those things, and futures related to the choice of not to have Terrazzo Park, and now futures related to the Maury learning community. All these things are things that I don't want to be in an operating budget, taking away from students' learning. And this is maybe one of my final opportunities to say, I really hope that, Dr. King, that somebody can help you with information to give us a better idea of the alternative programs that need to be added to Norfolk Public Schools. Expansion of the futures of Tidewater Park, that needs to be determined. The futures of the Maury learning community and the futures of CTE. All of these are things that will ultimately be somewhere in a CIP, I hope. I don't want them to be in your annual operating budget, and supplemental is a way to go. But I have to do the warning now. These are things, you told us, Dr. Thornton, this isn't going to be comprehensive. There's some things that we can do to make it better than it is, and thank you for the opportunity to do it now. But Mr. Gay, you've made some people really happy with the work that you and your colleagues are doing. And Dr. Thornton, I really appreciated the process flow chart of what we've got to do from here on.
Okay.
Dr. Stewart, can you explain the terrazzo flooring?
I do not follow.
In the construction, shall I do that, Mr. Gay?
It's probably better for you to do it.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Better for you. In the construction of the open forward corridors for our new schools that are planned,
The 5 brand-new schools.
actually, right now, the
Sorry,
two.
4.
The two.
Okay.
Could be
Okay.
5. Could be
Okay.
4, could be. Right now, terrazzo floors are not in the corridor. And what that is just, it's kind of like, you can't damage a terrazzo floor. If you
Okay.
don't put terrazzo floors in the high occupancy, high traffic areas, then you have to do replacement of tiles. And so the absence of terrazzo floors in the plan for these schools to be in budget are likely to show up in Mr. Gay's requirement for CIP in the future. Mr. Gay, I said that, you didn't.
Right.
Was I incorrect?
No.
Thank you, sir. That was me. I said it, not you.
So like terrazzo versus tile?
I understand. So schools that we're building brand new right now, we will need to be thinking already about replacing structures in them, planning for them. This is what
Yes.
planning for them
Mr. Gay
to be
must-
replaced already when they haven't even been built
Some
yet.
years out, not immediately, but some years out. And the only reason I mention that is the future of Tidewater Park, the future of the Maury Learning Committee, all of these things will add up. And what I don't want to happen is all of a sudden, the annual operating budget that's supposed to be helping kids learn every time, I don't want it to get occupied by some of these things that we're deferring or haven't made up a decision.
And do we, as a board, have any input on that, since our budget is going to have to cover those costs down the road? I don't know, I guess since you're on
Yeah.
the construction committee, I'm kind of directing that to you, but
What I
guess-
really think is it's critical for us to find out more about what is planned for the CTE school. It's critical for us to find out more about what Dr. King hopefully can present us on alternative education expansions, open campus. It's critical that we find out more about what's planned for the future schools in this PPEA, and it's critical for us to know what's going on at Tidewater Park so that we don't continue to defer something. Those are things that we can explore and get information from higher authorities,
Thank you.
other authorities, some authorities.
You know, it's all, budget driven, and so, in order to, have the budget to build the schools, inferior materials may be used, if inferior materials are used, obviously, whether it's in a school, a home, or whatever, you pay for it later in terms of maintenance, replacement, it's a principle that's applicable anywhere. If you're like me, you buy cheap clothes, you have to keep buying more clothes. If you're like Dr. King, buy really nice things. Less replacement cost. Okay, yes, Rodney.
In terms of what we have here as far as the scheduling, you all have determined your schedule based upon whatever formula or assessment that you come up with based upon need. Is that, so there's a reason that I'm just using this because I always do, that a parking lot at one school in next year would be a priority over a parking lot that shows up 3 years out. Is that solely based upon a needs assessment or what you just target what's worse? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, the bulk of it is based on a needs assessment, so we do target what's worse. If you take a look at your summary, and you see that roofing is the first category, and then ADA upgrades is the second. If you take a look at this list, this is how we categorize the projects and prioritize them based on the types of projects they are. And so if you take a look down this list, this is sort of how we decide which ones go first. Now, the other thing that we have done is, if you look at a 5-year plan, we've tried to spread the money out over 5 years. And the other thing is, what I'd really like you to pay attention to is this. All of the PPEA projects are included in our requests. So at this point, knowing that we're gonna spend on 4 schools $101 million, then this plan right here is only $76 million short. And what I can tell you from past history is that at best, we're gonna see $18 million of that additionally. And that's over the next 5 years. And that $18 million is probably the $3 million we get a year, and with the hopes that we get the money for Maury, which is $6.5 million. So let's say $25 million over 5 years.
Mr. Jordan, you're asking the project itself
I guess what I'm trying to
is, how did we determine which locations within the parking lot projects, as an example? What was the priority for the locations within that cluster of project?
Right, because I was trying to determine, are you doing just targeting what's worse? Are you doing a combination of targeting what's worse tied to the current school academic performance?
No,
That
that's not it.
that leads,
We're
no,
targeting what's worse,
I know,
and we're spreading it out over a 5-year period, and that's it.
right, so I'm asking, I would like to see if there's some additional analysis that not only targets what's worse, but also targets what's needed that's going to support the academic plan, if that makes sense to you.
All right, so you saying if the parking lot's real bad here, but we're making all A's, leave this one alone. And go to the one where we're making C's that really doesn't need a lot of work and fix it.
If it ties to retaining and attracting highly effective teachers and principals and school climates and other things, then maybe. I don't know. But I am asking, I am throwing that out there because I think when you talk about equity and needs, and yeah, we do it every day. That, you know, some things we may trade off for some others. And if we do have some efforts at, you know, I'll just use priority and focus schools as an example, to try to move those schools forward, then maybe that is you know, a quality point that moves those schools up on the list, whereas otherwise they may not. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that is the question that I'm asking.
I understand what you're saying. I think it would be better if you have some ideas that you could.
That's why I don't know. That's why I'm.
See, this is, as far as I'm concerned, the best idea. And I'm saying if you have some
You
other
just don't
ideas,
think it's the best
I
idea.
think it
So
would
tell
be
him what you
better
think's better.
If you get those to Dr. Thornton, and then we can work.
So I will say.
That was a response I told him he needed to. But I understand your point. If we go through our normal quantitative or process, and then is there a means by which we can factor in not only the academic, but the programmatic of that particular location to see if in fact, if two projects weigh evenly
Correct.
at an A school and a C school,
Correct.
is there another variable
Correct.
perhaps that one of the schools performance-wise has just struggled?
Correct.
Could that be a little weight in determining that? If all the money was there to do everything and everything else being equal, could that be a factor,
But
a weight?
You all putting all these additional qualifiers on it. I'm just simply saying, I think as a board and as a governance team, if we're going to talk about equity and performance and climate and what's needed, then I think facilities plays as much of a role in that as some other factors. And so if we're beginning to look at it from a human resources perspective, I'm just encouraging that we also look at it from a facilities perspective so that they are going together and hopefully are going to result in the types of things that we say we want to see.
Differentiating staff.
That's all right.
Can we find a way to differentiate resources that go to facility
Correct.
improvements? Haven't seen it.
Whatever it is, but I do think it's important that we look at that because
That's
otherwise, if
yeah.
the research typically shows that those schools that are highest in poverty, that are in the most struggling areas, get the least. And so if we're going to try to, when we're looking at the academic performance, they had a scattered plot, I think that's the right way, scattered plot, scattered graph, and it showed in their graph that the higher the concentration of poverty, the more challenges that we were having. You look at other research and it will show that the higher the concentration of poverty, the lower the quality of the facilities. So why would we make it doubly worse?
Right. That's a point well taken.
Okay. Anything else?
All right, that concludes the update on CIP. From a process standpoint, as I shared with the board, if you have any other questions that you want to share with me and Mr. Gay and I'll work on them, of course, with Dr. King and the cabinet. Otherwise, it will come forward to the board again for action, and that action would be approving the plan. And by doing so, we would say, to the extent that funding is available, these are the primary projects in year one that we would seek to address. Mm-hmm. And then we would come back to the board. If we don't get the full 17 million, we come back to the board and share with the board what those projects are that we'll address with the 3 million. Right.
Okay.
All right, thanks, sir.
That's good for me.
Thanks to Mr. Gay and his team, because they did a lot of work to pull the document together. It's been a few years since we've tried to pull a comprehensive document together, and it's a work in progress. And as we refine the process, hopefully we can factor in some of those other questions that you all asked.
All righty. Thank you, Rex.
The next item in the order on your agenda, I believe, is an update on FY16 budget planning. All right, you should have in your packet, yes. a black and white version of a PowerPoint to include 3 items that I want to update the board on, the first of which will be, now that the General Assembly has adjourned with an approved budget, I'll tell the board what the impact will be on NPS, followed by, Mr. Jordan had asked the question if we could share with the board the costs for illustration purposes, the cost of a 1% salary increase for instructional staff as well as principals and support and classified, and then central administration. So what is the 1% cost for a category including instructional staff, school-based, principals and support classified, and then central administration? And then finally, we have for you, for information at this point, we've broken out the priority and focus schools and provided for you the staffing resources that are at those schools. So the first item, very quickly, an update on the state budget outcome. You know that when we presented the budget to you in February, it was based on then Governor McCullough's proposed budget. Since that time, the General Assembly has adjourned with the approval of a budget with some amendments to the governor's budget. So under the governor's budget, we would have received $181.6 million. And I'm looking at the second page in your document here.
Can I just
Yes,
Janelle, do you have this presentation?
this is, I sent it to you. It's ahead of priority focus. It's the title of it. Yeah.
She just needs to post it on
Okay,
board docs.
all right, so I'll wait.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so again, the budget that we built was based on Governor McCullough's introduced amendments, and that would have provided $181.6 million to Norfolk Public Schools. The General Assembly budget, as approved and adopted on February 26, based on our projected enrollment, would provide $183.3 million to Norfolk Public Schools, representing a $1.64 million increase, due primarily to the General Assembly's budget, including the state's share of a 1.5% salary increase for SOQ covered positions. Obviously, Norfolk Public Schools and probably every other school system in Virginia staffs at a level higher than SOQ, but the state budget at this point in time will provide us an additional $1.6 million, so that will go towards closing that $8.8 million gap. So if you just did the straight math, that $8.8 million gap would be reduced by $1.6 million in additional state revenue based on General Assembly action. Yes, ma'am.
Was that the only change from General Assembly that impacted our budget?
That was the most significant change. They did some technical adjustments, but nothing of a significant. The governor's budget, the thing that we were hoping would stay, would be the restoring the funding for Virginia Preschool Initiative. The General Assembly budget does maintain that funding, so it doesn't add to our original proposal because we were assuming we were going to get it under the governor's proposal anyway. So the most significant change has been the addition of the funding for a 1.5% salary increase beginning August. Any questions? So when we bring back to the board final revisions to the budget, on the revenue side, you'll see this revision reflected, which will at least close the $8.8 million gap by $1.64 million. Any questions on state? Also, the General Assembly, on the expenditure side, the General Assembly adopted a lower VRS contribution rate that should save us about $500,000 on the expenditure side of the budget. We've got to run it through all of the salary formulas. Now, it's a reduction in the contribution rate. Hopefully, in the next biennium, that rate won't go back up. But it's all contingent upon the actuary results. But this session of the General Assembly actually lowered the contribution rate, or lowered the amount that they're going to contribute to the rate, thereby schools lower that rate as well. But it's subject to change from one year to the next. All right. The next item is just a one slide, providing. Do I have it? So this just illustrates for the board the cost of a 1% by three major employee group categories: teachers or instructional staff, primarily those at the school level, representing about 2,500 positions or FTEs, full-time equivalents. The cost of a 1% is just over 1.5 million. Well, the cost of a 1% for principal support and classified staff is just over 600,000. And then central administration, this building, administrators, professional staff, just under $122,000, or a total of 2.28 million. You'll recall that in the proposed budget from the superintendent, it's recommending a 2% salary increase for all staff, an estimated cost of 4.6 million. So this is the breakout for the cost of a 1% for those three major employee group categories. Yes, sir.
How does the General Assembly's addition of the 1.5% affect that?
Basically, in order to qualify for the 1.5%, we have to certify by June 15th that we are in fact going to provide the 1.5, at least effective for those SOQ positions. So the bottom line is, they're not requiring us to adopt the 1.5, but if we want to get the full funding, if we want to get the funding from the General Assembly, then we have to provide a 1.5% increase for those SOQ funded positions, which means that we've got multiple teaching positions that exceed the SOQ. So it'd be hard to pick and choose which positions within the teacher category would get 1.5 versus something lower, if that gets to your question. Is that? We're not required to do 1.5, but if we want to get the 1.5 money from the state,
So
we can't pick and choose which positions.
By providing a 2% raise, we'll be reimbursed 1.5% of that for those SOQ positions? So
That'll translate to roughly 1.5 million in state funding for us.
to go towards those raises?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
thank you. That clarifies that.
It cost us, as you saw, 2.3 million to give a 1% to everyone.
Right.
The state we would get state revenue of 1.5 million if we did 1.5%.
You did mention that it would be effective August for the SOQs. Do we typically, though,
There-
get raises in July?
Yes, for 12-month employees,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll do that to save a little money on the
Right.
state end.
Exactly.
You do what for July? And how do you handle July? Or you just make
Well,
it?
their funding is based on a cost formula that would start in August. If we
Right.
choose to do July,
Right.
then of course we're
We have to
bearing,
absorb
the
that.
state's not paying for that in essence.
We would have to absorb that
Right.
for those SOQ positions.
All right, very good, thank you.
All right, the next and final bit of information is just to provide the board with a very quick overview of the current staffing levels, particularly as it relates to instructional positions at our priority and focus schools. So, as an example, you see here Compostela, September 30, 2014 enrollment, or current year fall membership enrollment of 641 students. And what we've done here is we've provided for you the staffing by funding source. Of course, the primary funding source is the operating budget, and then there's Title I, 6B, which is special education, and then school improvement. You won't see any individual school-based positions funded through school improvement, but you will see, of course, operating and Title I. Of course, pretty much across the board, at the elementary level, you're going to have your K-5 classroom teachers. Then you're going to have your resource teachers, your English as a second language teachers, your special ed, your speech pathologists, your gifted, and your reading and math specialist, that initiative that we put into place a couple of years ago. And then you're going to have, in addition to that, to supplement through Title I, your interventionists at these schools, across multiple schools, but today we're just focusing on primary, priority and focus schools. And then, of course, you have teacher assistants, special ed assistants. So you can see Compostela total instructional related positions, 59.8. But then if you look at just the class size staffing compared to pupil, your pupil teacher ratio is 18.9. And you'll see across the priority and focus schools, the average class size, teacher to student, student to teacher is just about 17.5 to 18 to 1. And this is pretty much the same format across all of our priority and focus schools. And this is really just an information piece for you. If you had any questions for follow-up.
Just, on the gifted teachers, how many, at a middle school level, how many gifted students does a school have to have in order for them to have a full-time gifted teacher?
I'll defer to one of my program.
Isn't it 75 to get one teacher?
It's 175 at the elementary level.
Right, well,
At the high school, at the middle school level, I'm sorry, I believe we staffed it just one, they actually go to the building 2 days per week. It wasn't staffed by student.
Say that part again?
At the middle school level, they actually are on site 2 days per week at each middle school. It wasn't based on a number of students.
So I know because we have the young scholars at Ruffner, I assume that's why they have the larger cohort of gifted teachers. But just going back and looking at the school year 2012-2013 count, like Lee Taylor Middle had, a certain number of gifted middle school students. So you're saying all the middle schools except for Ruffner probably have the 0.6, 0.4 distribution like we see on here? Or, I mean, I'm just trying to, it caught my attention that at Lake Taylor,
Right.
we have a 0.6
Right.
for.
And Ruffner's a 4.4.
That's right.
Right. So is that driven by Young Scholars, which is a program within a school,
Right,
right?
so even when you, again, I'm just going back to the last chart that I had at the 2012-2013 school year. Ruffner had 169 students that were identified as gifted. And I assume that the Young Scholars are included in that, and they have 4.4. Lake Taylor Middle had 106, and they have a 0.6. So I was just trying to figure out what that.
It's the Young Scholars Program.
There's 4 young scholar gifted education teachers, and then there's 1 gifted education teacher that goes 2 days a week to serve those students that probably are not in the Young Scholars Program.
And those teachers
if you had
split
Norview on-
between schools, is that what it is?
Right, and if you had Norview on this, you would see that same number, because Norview has
Right,
the Young
that's it.
Scholars Program. So they're dedicated to young scholars, and then those 2 schools get the same thing that the other schools get.
So it's not primarily student-driven per se,
It's program-
from a
it's
ratio
program-
standpoint.
It's program.
Okay.
I don't know what's appropriate, but I hope we can find a way to drive it so that, well, if you all are saying that the services are meeting the need, then I'd like to hear that. If we need more support, then I'd like to be able to hear that as well. So,
And I can clearly understand your point with, if you use a particular middle school as an example that has in excess of 100 students, but has, in essence, a half-time person, is that equitable in terms of services? So that's something that we'll go back and look at. Because typically the formula is driven by the number of students that you have that are classified as gifted in terms of how many gifted endorsed teachers you assign to the school based on that. And middle school is always a little bit different, but for the most part, that's how we look at it. So we'll go back and take a look at that. So.
Okay, just one additional question, which you can't answer here now. But could we also see a comparison to non-title or priority of focus schools? So could we just take a look at another elementary school, for instance, and just see what the comparison is of enrollment that's close to another school, like Campostella 641? Can we see another elementary school that's close to 600 and see what the number of positions look like in general? Just so that we can see the difference between priority and focus. Thank you.
I think the biggest difference you're going to see are the number of interventionists.
Okay.
Definitely higher in the
Priority and focus, right. Okay. Yeah, so just for comparison's sake, that would be helpful.
Moving on, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, any other questions on that matter? Okay, yes, we're ready to move.
The next agenda item is to provide the board with, we're passing around several documents, to provide the board with a budget status on our major grants, our federal grants and our state-funded grants. So you should have at your place, being passed around now, several documents. The first three are two-page documents stapled together, and the final document is a one-pager. So the first document, and because the size of the spreadsheets and the amount of information that's on the spreadsheets and the size of the fonts, it didn't necessarily lend itself to a PowerPoint. So I would ask if the board would follow along on their hard copies. So the first two-page document you have, it's labeled NPS, of course, Federal Grant Programs, Expenditure Summary, Budget to Actual, Award Start Date through January 31st, 2015. And what this is a budget status, budget to actual, of the federal grants that currently are in operation by Norfolk Public Schools. We have several of them. The two-page document, if you look at page 2, the grand total under management currently is $48.3 million. And this is because we have multiple projects running concurrently across years. But again, if we go back to the first page, the first section, if you will, on page 1, it's labeled Title I, Part A. Of course, that is our major grant to support compensatory programs, economically disadvantaged. Title I, we have within Title I currently operating 2 award years, federal award years. Part A 2013 award, which we call here locally CH 114. And then we have Part A 2014 award, what we call here CH 115, for a grand total of the 2 awards running currently of $25.1 million rounded. To date, through January 31st, 2015, we have expended a total of $13.9 million through January 31, 2015. We have outstanding encumbrances as of January 31, 2015 of just under $500,000, with the remaining balance available as of January 31st, 2015 of $10.68 million. Now and you have the other federal programs here, including your adult basic ed, your Title I neglected and delinquent, your McKinney-Vento, which is homeless related, your IDEA Part B, Section 611, which is your special education, your Title II, which is your improving teacher quality, over to page 3, right on down through the list there. What I also have provided for the board are 2 other two-page documents that you have, with more detail related to the budget status of Title I. And this provides more detail of the summary information you have by major expenditure category. So if you were to look at these documents here, and those are actually posted because the fonts are a little larger. But if you look at the first document, the most current award is Title I, CH 115. So if you, again, go to page 2, I apologize for moving you back and forth, but when you have hard copies, multiple pages, that's the only way to do it. So for CH 115, and the award period began on July 1, 2014, and it runs through September 30, 2016. The total award is $12.4 million. Expended as of January 31st, 2015, $3.5 million. Encumbered, $162,934. The available budget as of January 31st, 2015, $8.7 million, representing an expenditure of 30% of the total budget. What I've also done here is projected out the expenditures through the end of this fiscal year and the end of this contract year, because the majority of the costs that are funded under this award are personnel related, and the contract year ends June 30. So projecting out salaries and benefits and outstanding encumbrances through June, basically February through June, represents just under $4 million. So when you combine what has been expended as of January 31st, the $3.5 million, with what's projected February through June of 15, the total expenditure is $7.5 million, leaving an estimated projected balance at June 30, 2015 of $4.7 million. That's the shaded column. I think I kind of jumped columns on you. Are you following me?
When does that need to be
And
spent?
the window closes for that, yes.
The window closes for that officially, finally, on September 30, 2016. However, we have to meet the 85% expended and encumbered requirement by September 30, 15 this year. So if you look at the box just below,
You got to encumber it a year ahead of schedule?
expend,
85%?
well,
What do you do
the
at the end
idea
of
is
the year?
that,
You run out of
the
money.
idea is that you would have expended
Right.
85% by September 30, 15. That you wouldn't be looking to encumber 85% of that award.
No,
Right.
but what do you do the rest of the year? And you only got
Well, you have the
15%.
remaining 15%. You have the remaining 15% on that award. And then by that time, you've got a new award coming in play. So with title and many of the major federal awards, you have at least 2 awards
Gotta love
running
the government.
concurrently.
Gotta love the government.
Well, the federal government, these are basically 24 to 27-month grants.
Right.
So at any period, you can have at least 2 federal grants running concurrently.
Currently.
So let me break down a little bit here. So we have a federal grant. We're looking at the one that we call CH 115, okay? That grant, the amount of that grant is roughly $12.4 million.
Correct.
Okay? If we go all the way over to the very last column, it says projected total expended by June 30th, 2015. The 60.7% is how much we will be expected to have spent of that $12.4 million.
Based on current salary and benefits projected out through June, yes.
Okay,
Can
all
I
right.
ask why they do that? Why do we have overlapping grants?
She was doing that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, I'm sorry. I
Okay,
apologize.
so June, July, August, September. So, and then the next 3 months, we needed to have spent 85% of,
Need to.
or more, of that $12.4 million.
Correct. So what I,
Go ahead.
okay.
Yep.
So to get to the 85% calculation, you'll see a little box
Yep.
just under there. So again, we start with the $12.4 million award times 85%. And then you see that equals 10.6 million, which is the 85% expenditure requirement. So if you were to compare what our projected expenditure through June of 7.5 to the required 10.6, the difference is the amount that we have to expend and/or encumber, but ideally expend by September 30, 2015,
Okay, and then,
if the projections continue to trend the way they are now.
and then remind us again of when the deadline is to expend it all
The deadline to expend this award in total,
in total.
the remaining 15% carryover,
Mhm.
is September 30, 2016. A year from the 85% benchmark.
Okay.
Does that,
Okay, I'm just gonna write that
thank you
down.
for
Mhm.
helping me clarify, simplify.
My next question, then there's another grant that comes in, CH 116.
CH 117 basically should be available to us this summer, July 1. We submit the application by July 1. The funding should generally be available in the early fall, late summer, early fall. Because they're operating on, the federal government operates on a October 1, September 30 fiscal year, wherein we operate on a July 1, June 30. So that's where you have the crossover as well.
So what plans are in place in the division to expend 3.022544 that are approved by the Department of Education or however, whomever needs to approve it, so that we are spending at a minimum 85 and we're doing so by the appropriate time?
Sorry, which one are you referring to?
It's the bottom figure, 3.022544.
Okay, yes.
We need to have spent that,
Right.
or said how we're going to spend it and have that approved in order for us to be compliant with the 85% spend.
Right.
And ideally, we want to spend more than that to get to 100%.
Right. So the intent for us is to not just meet at 85%, but 90, so that we have a safe zone there. But each school, within that total fund budget of about, I think you said 12 million, whatever the actual number is, within that, each school is allotted a certain amount of money, and each school has to expend 85% of what they are allotted to get the system to where we are expending those dollars in a timely manner. So they have plans linked to the needs of the school, which include spending plans linked to the needs of the school. So those plans are in place with the teaching and learning department, as well as being now monitored by executive directors to determine where those schools need to be at a particular time. So what that means is when you're not on target in terms of progression of spending, let's say that you're 5% off or you're 10% off or 10% behind, then there's a collaborative meeting taking place with the principal around the needs of the school to determine what are those things that are still prevalent, that have not been met for this particular school, so that we can ensure that those funds that are available for those children, that they're used for them. But that conversation has to take place, and that's why when you saw in the action plan that I provided, that it would include business and finance in terms of what Dr. Thornton is doing now, as well as presentations such as this with cabinet and ongoing reports that go to each executive director that lists the name of the school, the amount that they were allotted, how much they have expended to date, what their balance is, and what they should have spent. And when they're off, then that conversation has to take place, that conference, to determine what the next step should be. When I say what the next step should be, it needs to be linked to the needs of those students. So we have a process in place now, like that, and such as what I'm mentioning, that we're moving forward around. And this, over the past week, we provided reports to each executive director listing each school. So they're having the conferences with the schools. They know how much money they have, how much they've spent, how much they should be spending by a certain time to be on target. But it's not just about spending money for the sake of spending. It has to be linked to the needs of the school and the students. And remind us that also it must supplement, not supplant. So it cannot be something that we're already utilizing in our operating budget. It has to be something outside of that. So that speaks to potential extended day opportunities, summer opportunities, all of those things that come into play, that many of the schools have been securing to say our needs center on an extended year, which means that we want to provide a summer opportunity. Well, if it does, then they're estimating the cost of staffing that. When they're estimating the cost of staffing that, then we have to help them with that to ensure that they can staff it and that it does happen for the summer. So doing that in advance and having those conversations in advance. So the plans are in place for that to happen. When executive directors have those reports are highlighting which schools are not on target, which schools are ahead of target. First, we want to have the conversations with those that are not on target to help assist them with what the best practices will be for the needs of their school so that we can stay ahead on the spending. So I'll open with that. Ms. Campson, anything outside of what I mentioned? Okay.
Are you concerned at this date, March 4, are we too far into the cycle to spend all that each school should by good planning,
The 85%?
or even more? Are you concerned that some of the schools may not even meet that, given the time of year we are right now?
Well,
Even with
I'm
your
gonna-
additional monitoring and your additional executive director involvement?
I'm going to give an additional look at the spreadsheet to determine where schools are. Some of the executive directors may have some ideas about what they have seen thus far with that, and they can speak to that if they have already seen some red flags. However, the other piece for us is that in addition to the action plan that I put in place jointly with the team, we're also having conversations with the state level to work with VDOE, Business and Finance, to do what we call a desk review that will allow us to take advantage of additional reimbursements that we may not have been taking advantage of before to be more efficient and more effective to do that. So I would expect to know the dates of that linked to what our review internally entails right now. I would expect to know the dates of that by next week. So with that said, it should allow us to expedite that spending in the appropriate manner. And I would reemphasize in the appropriate manner because it should not be spent just for the sake of spending. Any comments from executive directors in terms of what you've seen based on your spreadsheets or concerns with the plans for spending or any of those things thus far? I know you just received those additional updates last week, but anything outside of what I've stated earlier?
Not outside of what you said, I would just add that we are monitoring the plans, the school improvement plans that the schools have developed, and we will continue to have those conversations to ensure that we are able to spend the way that Dr. King has shared, not to supplant but to supplement instruction that's going on in the schools.
And then are you taking the caution of 90% versus spending all 100 for a reason?
Well, yes, because you've got that carryover that's important for us to go forward so that we can have money going into the next section so that there are no gaps. Because when you look at it, that application period opens July, but if you're not careful, you could have some gaps there.
Okay.
And so really what we're working to do is to do more projections, because when you consider the fact that in July 1, the application window opens, you can take a look at what we received in the previous year and pretty much project what we think we're going to receive the following year. In the past, the federal government has said that you're not going to receive less than 85 or 80% of what you received before. And so we're developing a plan whereby we can allow schools to begin spending earlier, but saying, here's what we project that you're going to be allotted, but you can only spend maybe 3%, whatever that figure is going to be, in consultation with our chief operating officer. You know, you can only spend X percent between September and maybe the November time period until the money begins to flow. When you do that, there are no gaps. And that's what allows the seamless flow in spending. And that's something different than what we have done in the past. Okay, anything additional with that?
No, as we begin to give over the next couple of weeks, individual schools their projections through June. So basically, what we've done here at an aggregate level, we'll provide one for each individual school. And then they'll use that as the basis of seeing how they're positioned in meeting the 85%. And if it means that, and then they'll look at their current plan to see if their plan will allow them to get to the 85% or get them to the 85%. If not, then they also have the flexibility, and we as a division have the flexibility to revise the plans, and if it requires a plan amendment, then we can submit that to DOE. But time is of the essence, that we will want to do all of that within the next 3 weeks or so we can get the necessary revisions in place, approved by DOE, and then we can get to executing them, because nearly 90% of title funding is salaries and benefits.
Yeah.
So,
And if I might, I'll add that those amendments are going to have to take place in certain cases as we take a look at each of the 4 clusters that we have, and highlight schools that may be schools that are not on target with their spending. When that happens, then we're going to have a collaborative discussion, as I mentioned earlier, but part of that could center on jointly making decisions about how this money needs to be used. So that's a little different, and sometimes could be considered a little intrusive, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a joint discussion around what the students' needs are at that particular time and how this money can be used effectively. But that's going to be by school, because if you're behind on spending, you cannot take those funds that make up the difference and then redistribute it to other schools, because that's money that's earned within that school. So it's a matter of amending that individual school's plan to show how spending is going to be modified to address those needs. So that's how we're going about that.
So, without naming schools, I'm sure we have a couple of schools that perhaps are good models in terms of best practice for planning and execution. I would imagine. Yes, maybe.
Executive Director, so this we do.
Yes. And do we share those plans with other principals and schools that have similar needs, challenges? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Sure.
It may not be the exact same challenges, so that's where we sit down and work with the principals to make
Right.
sure that we're targeting those specific needs
Right.
at that school site.
Right.
We have their plan tailored, and
Mhm.
since they do have the funding, they can purchase exactly what they need
Right.
to take care of those issues in that area.
So I do understand that no 2 schools or 3 schools' plans would be exactly
They would not
the same, but I would also think that many of the needs are certainly closely mirrored or aligned.
There are similarities, just like last year. I think many of the schools use the same reading intervention. Those
Sure.
schools that had struggling
Mhm.
readers in the
Mhm.
schools make some decisions and use some
Mhm.
of the same intervention programs. So, yes, we do look at some of those needs. If a school is warned, let's say in English, or the school has some reading deficits, some
Mhm.
writing, or if it's more the mathematics, then we do look at those specific interventions
Mhm.
that can help that school
Okay.
to come out of that area of warning.
And I imagine the forward planning piece is huge in this. I mean, you certainly can't wait till it's time to use this, to start planning. Is there, and I know there's a lot of rules, guidelines, policies, what have you, related to how that money can be used. Is there a simplified version of that the board could get just for better understanding for our education?
In terms of how the money could be used.
Yeah, I mean, guidelines related to, I mean, for some of the other categories, it seems like it would be pretty self-explanatory. 6B or, Perkins money for CTE. But Title I seems to be, I don't know, this is
We could do that.
question, it seems to be pretty broad because of what you can and cannot, and perhaps I'm way below the line here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Provide your Title I, explaining Title I and how it works.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be a problem for us to put together a bulleted display
Sure.
of how the money can be used.
One
That won't-
pager?
Yeah, that's not a problem for us to do that. We can do that.
Dr. Houston,
Yes.
to go back to your question, in cabinet this past Tuesday, we talked about having an institute for principals related to Title I. And we have talked about one particular principal who has done an outstanding job with managing her title program and having her to partner with some of the staff members in the Office of Title I to conduct some training, professional development for each and every principal and making it a requirement. And then those principals who need more differentiated instruction or some.
Safety net.
Yeah, a safety net, then the office can work with those particular principals individually. So we have discussed that, looking at who is doing a great job and having them teach other principals.
I commend you for that. That's taking a bright spot and duplicating it throughout the community.
Okay. One last quick comment.
Yes.
But remember that what this means is that, as you heard Dr. Thornton, that by September 30, you typically have the ending of a particular grant range where you have to take care of the 1%, and typically it's that 15% that's left over. But you also have the beginning of a new grant that's coming into play that started at that July 1, and it's a 2-year grant, and you have to work to expend that same amount in the 85% range by the following September 30th. So you've got dual activity going on with that, and so that has to be taken into consideration as we develop these plans, to monitor these plans, rather.
Right.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Rodney.
Going back to the, central administration level, schools that lost money, or that we had to return funds from the previous situation, do we have any of those schools that are in danger of not meeting the threshold where we are today? And if so, what, from a central administration perspective, plan do we have in place to support those particular schools that lost before and may be in danger of losing again?
Well, in terms of schools that were in jeopardy of not being able to take advantage of the funds that we were speaking around earlier, the team came together to meet to take a look at those schools to determine how to adjust spending. And so really what they did was look at the operating side and where we could move dollars from one place to account for what those schools wanted. So for the most part, we think we did a good job of that. And now we're at a point where the schools have other monies available to them. And so we're continuing to monitor that. But I can't say that at this point that we have schools that are lacking in terms of the dollars that have been allotted to them. Have you all seen any examples of that? I've not been made aware of any of that at this point. So we'll continue to monitor that. But the challenge behind that, and the reason that we don't want to be in that position, is because you have to look deeper into your teaching and learning budget, for example, and then move monies from one location that you had planned to use for a different purpose, then to allocate it back to the school for the purpose that they would have been able to use title funds for, and then avoid the supplanting process with it. So that was a tedious process to be able to do that. So we feel like with the funding mechanism that we have in place now that we don't have that, so.
And on the personnel side, since the bulk of the money seems to be tied to personnel, and I guess the ability to encumber it or hire is based upon availability of personnel, is there any type of expedited human resources process or anything from personnel side that would provide sufficient support for the schools if indeed they determined by their plan that they need additional personnel to support student learning? Are we going to find that because of where we are in the process that we may end up trying to spend more money on things because it's easier to acquire than maybe highly effective, highly qualified personnel?
Yeah, I'll begin and then ask Human Resources to jump in. The challenge for this particular process linked to Title I is that there's a requirement that the individuals that you hire must be highly qualified. And so, for example, if you have an individual that has a certain major but hasn't gone through all of the vetting process to become quote-unquote highly qualified, then they're not able to hire those people. So that presents a challenge within itself. So yes, that's an ongoing one, but the Human Resources Department is working along with us to try to help us pinpoint more and more of those. But if you remember, even in general, we have that challenge. And so when you take a look at the fact that we're attempting to support schools with this effort in Title I, in addition to staff, then that challenge continues with that. It's not impossible, but we're attempting to be creative with the way that we do our job fairs and all of those things that come into play. So with that said, any comments from Human Resources or outside of that?
And he's right, for the Title I positions, they have to be fully licensed and not yet provisionally licensed. And the majority of the Title I positions are elementary positions. They're the interventionist positions. We only have 4 Title I supported positions at the middle schools, 2 at Ruffner, 2 at Lake Taylor. But I do know that one of them, at the beginning of this year, was challenging to fill because it required the full license. We ended up hiring somebody who had retired, who came back to fill that position at Lake Taylor.
And I guess my last question for now, compared to where we were last year in spending and where we are right now in spending, are we behind, about the same, or ahead?
In terms of the dollar amount, we are in a better position in terms of what amount needs to be expended to meet the 85%. We're in a better position. Last year we were, it was a much bigger number because the award itself was a little bigger. So yeah, short answer is we're in a better position. Yes.
So can I just follow up with that, because you're really referring now to CH 114 potentially, and the dollars in that year. And I know, Michael, were you planning on going through that? Because as we look at this
Yes.
document.
I have CH 114, which closes September 30. And CH 114 start date was July 1, 2013, and it runs through September 30, 2015. So it actually closes on September the 30th, 2015, using the same process. Expenditures to date through January 31, total 10.3 million, encumbered as of that same date, 333,000. Available balance as of January 31, just under 2 million, 1.97 million. Total expended by percentage, 84.4%. Projected through June 2015, February through June, 365,000, with a projected remaining balance at June 30, 2015 of 1.6 million. The one thing about this particular grant at this point in time, we don't have many positions at all in this particular award. They had already been moved over to CH 115. So right now, projected through June, we would have an available remaining balance of 1.6 million that needs to be expended by the September 30, 2015 deadline.
To get us to what percent?
100%.
To 100%.
Right.
So, Dr. Thornton, we totaled both of those grants in terms of what we needed to, an estimate of what we needed to expend by September 30, 2015. I didn't bring that in with me. Do you remember what that was? I think it was like about 8 to.
The CH 115, the 85% threshold is 3 million, plus this 1.6 is the 4.6.
So that means
Total.
that's a figure that is of interest to us.
Right.
And it goes along with what we just mentioned. And because when you look at that figure of 4 million, in addition to what the entire spending plan entails, within that 4 million, there are schools that are falling in certain categories. And so we're highlighting which schools are on target again and which ones are not. And to get to that spending requirement of 4 million so that we take care of both of those, then we have to assist and support the individual schools based on where they are and ensure that their spending matches what the needs of the children would be. And so we've whittled that down to what that amount is that we have to spend, even with the projection. And outside of that projection, if some schools are off on their projection, then that number could be larger than that. That's why monitoring is so important. And so that's why the process that we just mentioned, in addition to utilizing the desk review in terms of additional reimbursements that we may be able to get outside of this to assist with the support from VDOE. So that's on our radar. So.
Because I'll note that to spend that, we're even just at 84.6, so we're not even at 85, under CH 115, sorry, CH
Correct.
114.
Correct.
So we're gonna be reallocating some money back if we do not spend up to 85%.
That's
If
why
we
I
don't
mentioned
spend 100% of this.
Right.
Exactly.
100% of this one.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
where that figure comes from, because when you total both of those,
Right.
based on the projection and everything, then we want to get to 100%, to the 100%, and we were looking at wanting to get to 90% with the other, not just
Right.
85, to give us that buffer, so, yes.
Right. And I think that's why, Dr. King, your monthly reports on this to us, so that we know what
Right.
the status is as you work through this process. And the community will see too,
Right.
what you're allocating school expenditure will help the community understand where we are and help the board understand where we are in
Sure.
terms of a real huge focus on this
Right.
spending.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you. We appreciate you all putting together this information to give us a good understanding of not only where we are, but to educate us a bit more also on the requirements and use of title spending. Thank you very much.
Although we just really talked about Title I, right? So
Right.
there's other title spending.
Right.
Were you gonna go through that, Michael? Dr.
Just
Thornton? I'm sorry.
for today, the idea was just to share with you the aggregate status of each of those other grants as of January 31st, including Adult Basic Ed, Title II, 6B, which is our special ed, and then at a subsequent work session, provide the board with more detail, similar to what you saw in Title I in terms of projecting it out and what we would need to do, if anything, to adjust our plans, to ensure that we spend the monies by the deadline, spend it appropriately by the deadlines.
Is there an area item of particular interest tonight? So we have about 10 minutes left before we should begin our transition. Thank you, Dr. Thornton.
Calendar.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. My apologies.
All right, the final item for review would be the 2015-16 academic calendar options. Of course, we have a school division committee that works on this, representative of school division stakeholders. And it's really coordinated by Deb Rock, who is recuperating from a knee, but she's doing well. But she was working with us by way of telephone over the snow time. So what we have for you this evening is pretty much an update on where we are in the process. Of course, the process includes our participation as a school division on a regional calendar committee, Hampton Roads Region. Of course, we have our own internal NPS calendar committee with diverse representation. Tonight, we are sharing with the board the results of a stakeholder survey around 2 options. Of course, the criteria and considerations required to open after Labor Day, provide 180 days of instruction, school days of instruction, distribute days as evenly as possible, align winter breaks, spring breaks, focus on staff development, and ensure students not in school on election day. Calendar option similarities. Of course, the first day of school is the Tuesday following Labor Day. It also, both options include parent-teacher conferences scheduled for October the 12th, 2015. 3 teacher record work days throughout the year. 6 full professional learning days for staff, in addition to the pre-service week. And then, of course, spring break, the week of March 28th through April 1st, 2016. Calendar options again. Under option 1, it includes and reflects a full 2-week or 10 school day winter break, including, of course, your weekends. December 21st through January 1st, kids return on January 2nd, of course. A high school exam period. Second semester begins on February the 8th, and you can see the differences there. And then, of course, with the start date and the end date, June 22nd and 23rd would be the graduations. The actual last day, under option 1 would be June 23rd. Under option 2 would be June 21st. And again, the difference is driven primarily by the winter break. In option 1, it has a full 2-week, and then it has a week and a half or 8 school days on option 2. Based on survey results, the overwhelming response was for option 1.
It's not as much as it was last year.
83% of the respondents for option 1, 17% of the respondents option 2. Comments? Obviously, it ends late. We're into the June 23rd under option 1, June 21st under option 2. Based on the process, survey results, the recommendation of the committee was to recommend to the board option 1 as the Norfolk Public Schools 2015-16 academic school year calendar. Yes, sir.
When are the SOL tests?
I'll defer to my colleagues.
Starts May 18th this year.
This year?
May 18th.
You referring to this year?
On next calendar year, would they adjust down?
It'll probably be a bit, I think, in the past, we started it 2 weeks before Memorial Day. This year we started a week before, which happens to be May 18th. Oh, Karen's here.
Right, I was just gonna
That's what Karen
say
answered.
that, they have not given us the testing window for next year. Usually it's a pretty large window, and we have to pick 4 weeks within that window.
4 weeks.
Yes, so we're waiting for them to let us know what that window will be, and then we will look to see how that coincides with, our end of the year.
Just my concern is if the testing window closes and then you have an extended period of time afterwards until the end of school, that's not usually optimally used.
I think that's why we're starting to test a week later than we usually do this year, because we hope to be late this year also.
Warren?
Bet you can figure out what I'm gonna ask. This is all premised based on the start of school as the day after Labor Day. But it's never too soon to start asking the questions in preparation for what if you began school for students before that time period. And I would say for the next school board, next year's school board, asking those questions sooner rather than later will facilitate the school board having the option and the superintendent having the joy of considering that possibility. I would highly encourage some process capability be set up for getting the answers to those kinds of survey questions early on, assuming it would be post-July 1st with the new faculty. But I would encourage that to occur. I bet folks knew that was coming. And you know what? More and more and more school systems are going there.
On that note, did we submit the waiver for, I guess we were considering Jaycox?
Yes, that
Yes.
went out.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir. We have not heard anything back yet. We're anxious to hear back because we want to see how the justifications that we used are received in anticipation of, I assume we're still planning to apply, for the next year, so we can start very early writing, getting that in, because I know that was a big thing to get it in much earlier.
We had that on the agenda tonight.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was on the agenda.
Yeah, I saw it.
Well, that was when we.
I was hoping it was a short answer.
You were just trying to get your favorite one on quick.
Okay, so we're right at the point where we need to have a transition. I would say with regards to agenda planning, of course, next week on the 11th, next Wednesday, we have a work session committed to budget discussion from 1 until 3. We've agreed to come in at 12 for additional business. Yes, everybody with me? Okay. Okay. And then on the 18th, I don't know if you all have your copy of the 18th. As we were reviewing the agenda for the 18th, one of the things that I think is always important for us to consider our stakeholders in the way that we conduct our business and the way the agenda was set up. Originally, we would have an open informal discussion, and then we would go into our regular closed session for student support matters and personnel matters, then come back out for the business meeting. And I thought a good recommendation was made by, I think his name is Kirk, that said, perhaps we, meeting with myself, we would begin with the personnel matters at 2, start that first. That way when we come out, we go right on informal and into the business meeting so that any stakeholders that's here for the budget portion of the meeting wouldn't have to wait around and then come back for the business meeting, but they desired they could remain from that time straight on through the, business/formal session. Is that confusing?
Yeah. It was a good idea.
I'll tell him. He said so.
So that's on the 18th.
Yes. So, let me get it in front of me, and then, Rodney, I'll walk you through this.
That's okay, you just email it to me, I can follow it.
We could use Title I money to help you.
One request of the 18th.
Are we supplementing or supplanting? Let's be careful.
Yes.
A request I would have from Dr. Thorpe and his team,
Yeah.
please assimilate all that on one single sheet of paper for the calendar recommendations as opposed to, in other words, a single sheet of paper that lists all the dates rather than a calendar for 12 months. Does that make sense? For the calendar recommendations that we'll vote on the 18th. It just makes it easier for me to see it.
So,
You know what that is, right?
so keep in mind, on the 18th, we'll adopt the calendar on the 18th. Okay.
Formal session at 7, which we need to note on the calendar.
Right.
So that date starts at 2, it's the adjourning.
Yes.
What I was just asking for is to have it put on one page because it's easier for me to read. The calendar. Yeah, Ms. Banks knows that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now, let me ask you the
Safety
last question.
net.
So, Rodney, do you need to know how many people are making the journey to Williamsburg next week? Or Newport News, I'm sorry.
Heritage High School.
Yeah.
Do I need to know how they're making the journey?
No, how many?
Yeah, I thought we already.
But, yeah, so I'd love to go, but. I'm
Yeah, I
not
think
able to.
Janelle already turned all that stuff in.
Okay,
Because we shoot around back, should have a different.
yeah, yes, definitely. Okay, so one last order of business, of course. This is our time when we appreciate our school board clerk, and we certainly appreciate, Janelle, all that you do. And I'm gonna read this, then Courtney has a presentation. So I've always wanted to do this. Janelle does it every, every month it seems we have resolutions or proclamations. Let's see if I can get this right. I don't have the same voice here. So whereas school board clerks in each locality throughout our great Commonwealth are appointed by law to fulfill their duties and responsibilities, and whereas school board clerks are responsible for keeping accurate records of the meetings and proceedings of the school board, a record of all receipts and disbursements, and a record of all official acts, and whereas school board clerks perform such other duties in connection with the school business of his or her county or city as may be required by the school board, and whereas school board clerks maintain frequent contact with the public, including parents, employees, and the media, on behalf of the school board and superintendent, and whereas school board clerks in the performance of duties, real close to the end here, often are required to work extra hours attending school board meetings, and whereas school board clerks join with school boards to help ensure that students achieve their highest potential, and whereas school board clerks provide an invaluable service for school board members and superintendents, now therefore be it resolved that the school board of the city of Norfolk hereby recognizes February 16th to the 20th, unfortunately due to the snow, we're unable to do this on that date, as the Virginia School Boards Association School Board Clerk Appreciation Week in the Commonwealth of Virginia, under our signature, Kirk Houston and Samuel King, and board, and we have, yes, a picture for you.
And Elizabeth is bringing a gift here that we have.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
We got it. Thank you with it.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you for all you do.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
Really appreciate that.
This is for all the extra hours you put in. You can eat those here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Very nice.
This is from the cabinet. And there's gifts, there's a small gift for the assistants.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate
So
all
that-
of your support, and it's a pleasure working with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Certainly, let Gabriel and Ariel, yes.
Yes.
No, how much we appreciate that.
Thanks.
They can't get into that basket.
Can you just show the plan?
Standing ovation.
Wait,
Standing up.
so much.
Okay, all right, well, this is, this portion of our business, and so we will have brief recess, and we'll begin our public hearing right at 7 p.m. in the formal boardroom.